Keeper. That was the name burning through Kyria's mind the moment the mark seared into her flesh. Not a title she'd earned, not a destiny she'd chosen, but a bond forced upon her by an infant she'd never met and an alpha king who claimed her as his the instant their fates collided. Kyria had been invisible her entire life, the lone Omega in the frozen borderlands, a healer so far beneath the pack hierarchy that even rogues pitied her. She'd learned to survive on scraps and silence, to move through the world like a ghost, and to believe the lie that Omegas were meant to suffer alone. Then a baby appeared in the snow before her, abandoned, freezing, dying. And Kyria did what no one had ever done for her. She refused to walk away. The moment her bare skin touched the infant's icy forehead, destiny rewrote itself. A mark exploded across her arm in waves of molten gold, ancient, binding, inescapable. The seal of Alpha King Zerak, wolves circling a crescent moon, branded into her flesh like a claim of ownership. Before she could scream, before she could run, the forest came alive with predators. Zerak emerged from the shadows with his warriors at his back, his golden eyes locked on the mark that now made her his. His voice was thunder and smoke when he spoke, a single word that shattered what remained of her freedom. Mine.
Chapter 1. The Unwilling Keeper. Kyria woke to warmth, and that alone told her she was no longer in her world. Her eyes opened to a ceiling painted with constellations in gold leaf, each star connected by delicate silver lines that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. The bed beneath her was obscenely soft, piled with furs she recognized as wolf pelts worth more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Silk sheets whispered against her skin which was clean. Someone had bathed her, dressed her in a nightgown of dove-gray linen that felt like water. Panic hit her chest like a fist. She sat up too quickly and the room tilted. Her right arm throbbed with a deep, pulsing heat. She looked down and her breath caught. The mark was still there, no longer burning, but very much real. Wolves circling a crescent moon, rendered in lines of shimmering gold that seemed to move beneath her skin. Beautiful, terrifying, permanent. The door opened without a knock. Zerak filled the doorway like a storm contained in flesh. He was even more imposing in the firelight than he'd been in the forest, tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the frame, broad-shouldered and moving with the controlled grace of a predator who'd never known fear. His hair was black as a moonless night, pulled back from a face carved from stone and shadow. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, molten gold, ancient and knowing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "You're awake," he said, his voice that same gravel and smoke rumble that had claimed her in the snow. "Good. We have much to discuss." Kyria's fingers curled into the silk sheets. "Where am I?" "Shadow Peak Fortress, my home." He stepped inside and the room seemed to shrink around him. "Your home now, it would seem." "I didn't agree to that." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or irritation. "The mark on your arm suggests otherwise." She wanted to spit at him, to rage, but her voice came out small and broken instead. "What did you do to me?" "I did nothing." Zerak moved to the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. "The mark chose you. The Keeper's seal doesn't appear by accident or force. It responds to an act of pure selflessness, a willingness to sacrifice for one who cannot save themselves." He turned back to her, and there was something almost grudging in his expression. "You saved my nephew's life. The mark is your reward." "Reward?" The word tasted like ash. "You branded me like cattle." "I branded nothing. The magic is older than my bloodline, older than any pack in these territories." His jaw tightened. If I could have chosen differently, Omega, I would have, but fate, it seems, has a sense of irony. The casual cruelty of that statement, the dismissal in the word Omega, ignited something in her chest. Chiaria threw back the covers and stood, her legs shaking but holding. "Then remove it, break whatever spell this is, and let me go." "I can't." For the first time, something almost like regret crossed his features. Once the Keeper's seal bonds, it cannot be undone, not without killing both you and the child you saved. The room went very still. "What?" Zarek's expression was granite. "The mark ties your life to his. You are bound now, Omega. If he dies, you die. If you flee too far from him, his strength weakens and he begins to fade. You are his keeper in the most literal sense. His survival depends on your proximity, your care, your very existence." Chiaria's knees buckled. She caught herself on the bedpost, her knuckles white. "No, no, that's not... I didn't..." "You touched him." Zarek's voice was merciless. "You poured your compassion into a dying royal heir when any sensible creature would have run. The consequences are yours to bear." Hot tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not in front of him, not in front of an alpha who clearly saw her nothing more than an inconvenient vessel for his bloodline's survival. "Who is he, the baby?" "His name is Ashen, son of my younger brother Darius." Zarek's expression darkened, grief and rage warring beneath the surface. "Darius and his mate were murdered 3 nights ago, assassinated in their sleep by those who seek to destabilize my rule and eliminate every heir to the Shadow Peak throne." Despite herself, despite everything, Chiaria felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't protect him." Zarek moved closer, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He smelled of pine and smoke and something wild she couldn't name. "You do. Whether you want this burden or not, whether you hate me or not, that mark on your arm makes you the most valuable creature in my fortress. Ashen's enemies will come for you. They will try to separate you from him, to kill you both and eliminate the last obstacle to my throne." Her throat tightened. "So I'm a prisoner?" "You're protected." "There's a difference?" "Not to you." His smile was cold. A soft cry broke the tension, thin, fragile, heartbreaking. Chiaria's head snapped toward a door she hadn't noticed before, partially concealed by heavy curtains. The mark on her arm flared with sudden warmth, pulling her forward like an invisible thread. "He's through there," Zarak said quietly. "The nursery connects to these chambers, your chambers now." She didn't wait for permission. Her feet carried her across the room, through the door, into a space bathed in soft candlelight. The nursery was smaller, warmer, filled with hand-carved furniture and soft blankets, and there, in a cradle of polished oak, lay the infant who destroyed her life. Ashen was awake, his tiny fists waving in the air. In the light, he could see him properly for the first time. Dark, downy hair, skin still pale but no longer blue, and eyes. Gods, his eyes were the same molten gold as his uncle's, wide and aware, and fixed on her with an intensity that looked like almost recognition. The moment she stepped close, he stopped crying.
Chiaria's hands moved on their own, reaching into the cradle, lifting him with a gentleness she didn't know she possessed. He was so small, so impossibly fragile, warm and alive and breathing against her chest. The mark on her arm pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "He knows you," Zarok said from the doorway. "He's been restless since they brought you both here. The healers said he wouldn't settle, wouldn't eat. But the moment you were near," he trailed off, something unreadable in his expression. Chiaria looked down at Ashen, at this tiny stranger who'd become her chain, his little hand wrapped around her finger, gripping with surprising strength. And despite the rage, despite the violation, despite everything, something in her chest cracked open. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. Neither did he. Zarok's voice was softer now, almost gentle. "But you're all he has, the only mother he'll ever know." The word mother hit her like a blow. She wasn't his mother. She was an Omega who'd made one compassionate choice and lost her entire future. But when Ashen nuzzled against her, making soft, contented sounds, when the mark warmed her skin with a sensation that felt almost like rightness, she couldn't find the words to argue. Zarok watched them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. "There are clothes in the wardrobe. Eat when the servants bring food. Rest when you can. In 3 days, I'm presenting you to the Pack Council as Ashen's official keeper." "And if I refuse?" He looked back at her, golden eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "Then you doom an innocent child to death, and yourself along with him. The mark has already made its choice, Omega. The only question now is whether you have the strength to live with it." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Kyria alone with the baby in her arms and the golden brand burning on her skin, a mark that promised protection and imprisonment in equal measure, a bond she never wanted but could no longer escape. Ashen yawned against her shoulder, tiny and trusting and utterly dependent, and Kyria, the invisible Omega who'd spent her whole life running from notice, held him close and wept silently for the freedom she'd never have again. Chapter 2. 3 days in a gilded cage taught Kyria exactly how little freedom she'd ever truly had. The servants came and went like ghosts, bringing food she barely touched, fresh clothes she reluctantly wore, and pitying looks she wanted to claw off their faces. They called her "my lady," with voices dripping false respect, as though a title could disguise what she really was, a prisoner whose only value lay in the mark burned into her flesh and the infant who couldn't survive without her. Ashen, at least, was oblivious to the politics of his existence. He ate, he slept, he cried when wet or hungry, and he reached for Kyria with tiny, desperate hands whenever she tried to put him down. The mark pulsed with warmth each time she held him, a constant reminder of the invisible chain binding them together. She hated it. Hated the violation, the lack of choice, the way her body responded to his needs before her mind could even process them. When Ashen whimpered in the night, she woke instantly, crossing the room before she was fully conscious. When he refused a bottle from the wet nurse, her arms ached with the need to hold him. The bond was rewiring her instincts, making her a mother against her will. And yet, when he looked at her with those impossibly golden eyes and smiled, God's helper, he'd smiled this morning, something in her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with magic. Zarok appeared on the afternoon of the 3rd day, emerging from the shadows of her chamber as though he'd materialized from smoke itself. Kyria was in the window seat, Ashen asleep against her shoulder, watching snow fall over the fortress walls. She didn't turn to acknowledge him. "You haven't tried to escape," he observed. "Would I get far?" Her voice was flat, exhausted. "No." He moved closer, and she felt the weight of his presence like a shift in atmospheric pressure. "But I expected you to try regardless. Most Omegas I've known are more defiant." "Most Omegas you've known haven't been magically enslaved to a dying infant." She glanced at him then, meeting those predatory gold eyes with all the bitterness she could muster. "Tell me, Alpha King, do you enjoy watching me suffer? Is that why you keep appearing unannounced, to savor your victory?"
Something flickered across his face, anger perhaps, or something harder to maim. I came to explain the bond. You deserve to understand what you're bound to. I understand perfectly. The mark ties my life to his. I'm a glorified wet nurse who happens to be magically necessary. It's more complicated than that. Zarak settled into the chair opposite her, his massive frame somehow fitting into the delicate furniture without breaking it. The Keeper's seal doesn't just link your lives, it creates a symbiotic relationship, a sharing of strength and essence. When Ashen is near you, he thrives, his wolf stabilizes, his healing accelerates, even his temperament calms. You've seen it yourself. She had. The physicians who examined him daily marveled at his recovery, how quickly the hypothermia damage had reversed, how strongly his heartbeat now thundered in his tiny chest. But the bond works both ways, Zarak continued, his voice taking on an edge she didn't like. The farther you are from him, the weaker you both become. A few rooms away, you'll feel fatigue, irritability. A quarter mile and the pain begins, headaches, nausea, muscle cramps. Beyond that, he paused, making sure she was listening. Beyond that, you'll both start to die, slowly at first, then faster. Within 3 days of separation, your organs will fail, his will fail, neither of you will survive. The words hit her like ice water. 3 days? 3 days, he confirmed. I've had scholars researching the Keeper's seal since the moment it appeared on your arm. The historical accounts are consistent. Distance is poison, proximity is survival. You are bound to Ashen as surely as he is bound to you, until he reaches maturity or one of you dies. Kyria looked down at the sleeping infant, at his peaceful face and tiny rosebud mouth. Maturity. For a werewolf, that meant at least 18 years. 18 years of her life stolen. 18 years of servitude to a child she hadn't asked for, in a fortress she hadn't chosen, under the control of an alpha king who saw her as a walking incubator for his bloodline. You said the bond shares strength. Her voice cracked despite her efforts to control it. What does that mean?
Zarak's expression shifted, becoming almost clinical. It means his wolf will draw on your resilience, your healing capabilities, your life force. In return, you'll gain protection. His royal blood will make you harder to kill, more resistant to injury and illness. The mark itself will defend you if threatened. But the exchange isn't equal. He takes more than you receive, especially in these early years when he's most vulnerable. So I'm feeding him my life. The words tasted like ash. You're keeping him alive. There's a difference. Not to me! Fury rose in her chest, hot and wild. You keep saying I had a choice, that the mark appeared because of my selflessness, but that's a lie. I made one compassionate decision and was punished with slavery. How is that fair? How is that anything but a curse? Zarak leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that she could see the scars on his knuckles and the exhaustion shadowed beneath his eyes. It's not fair. Nothing about this situation is fair. My brother is dead, murdered by cowards who struck in the night. His mate was slaughtered beside him. Their son was left to freeze in the snow because he was inconvenient to someone's political ambitions. And you, his voice softened almost imperceptibly, you were alone in a forest, just trying to survive, and fate decided to make you responsible for the last living heir to a bloodline you have no stake in. The admission surprised her. She'd expected cruelty, domination, the casual dismissal of her pain. Not this raw honesty, this acknowledgement that they were both trapped by circumstances neither had chosen. If I could undo it, if I could free you and find another way to protect Ashen, I would. But I can't. The mark is absolute. So we're left with only one option: make the best of an impossible situation. Best for whom? Kyria demanded. You get a magically bound servant to raise your heir. I get a lifetime of captivity. You get protection, the full resources of Shadow Peak Fortress, the loyalty of my pack, and my personal guarantee that no one will harm you or treat you as anything less than Ashen's keeper, a position of honor, not servitude. Honor, she laughed bitterly. You dress it up with pretty words, but I'm still a prisoner, still an Omega with no rights, no voice, no choice in my own future. Zarak's jaw tightened. You have more choice than you think. You can hate me, hate this situation, hate every moment of your new life. Or you can accept that fate chose you for a reason and find purpose in protecting an innocent child who never asked to be orphaned. Don't you dare, Kyria hissed, pulling Ashen closer. Don't you dare make this about him, about making me feel guilty for wanting my freedom. I'm making it about survival, his eyes blazed. Mine, yours, and his. Those assassins are still out there, Omega. They failed to kill Ashen once. They won't fail again. And when they come, and they will come, the only thing standing between him and a blade in the dark is you and that mark on your arm. Ashen stirred at the raised voices, his little face scrunching in distress. Instantly, the mark flared warm, and Kyria's anger dissolved into instinctive concern. She shifted him, murmuring soft sounds until he settled again, his small hand curling against her collarbone. When she looked up, Zarak was watching them with an expression she couldn't read, something almost wistful. He trusts you, the Alpha King said quietly, completely, utterly, without reservation. That's the purest form of love our kind knows, the bond between a child and the one who protects them. He stood, towering over her. You can resent me, resent the circumstances, resent the gods themselves, but don't punish him for needing you. I'm not. But the words died in her throat because maybe she was. Maybe her anger at being trapped was bleeding into how she held Ashen, how she looked at him, how part of her wanted to reject this bond and everything it represented. Zarak moved toward the door, then paused. The Pack Council meets tomorrow night. I'll present you formally as Ashen's keeper and announce your protected status. After that, you'll have access to the entire fortress, the libraries, the gardens, the training grounds. You won't be confined to these rooms. Still trapped within your walls. Still alive, he corrected, and so is he. The door closed behind him, leaving Kyria alone with the sleeping child and the mark that pulsed with gentle warmth against her skin. She looked down at Ashen, at his peaceful face, and the way he'd somehow worked his way deeper into her arms, seeking her warmth even in sleep. I don't want to love you, she whispered. Loving you means accepting this, accepting him, accepting that my life is no longer my own. But even as she spoke the words, Ashen's tiny hand flexed against her skin, his fingers spreading, then closing again in a gesture that looked almost like reaching for her, holding on. And Kyria felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from this exact vulnerability. Because despite the violation, despite the rage, despite everything, when Ashen sighed contentedly in her arms, when the mark warmed with shared life, when his heartbeat synced with hers in a rhythm older than words, her heart, the treacherous thing, was beginning to betray her.
Chapter 3. The Alpha's Shadow. The Pack Council meeting was a spectacle of dominance and barely concealed hostility. Kyria stood beside Zarak's throne in the great hall, Ashen sleeping against her chest in a wrap of midnight silk. The room was cavernous, built from stone and ancient timber, lit by iron chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across the assembled wolves. Alphas, betas, advisors, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She was an Omega in a room full of predators, her only protection the mark on her arm and the Alpha King who sat above them all like a dark god carved from granite. "This Omega," Zerak announced, his voice carrying through the chamber with absolute authority, "bears the Keeper's seal. She is bound to my nephew by ancient magic, and through that bond, she is untouchable. Any who harm her harm Ashen. Any who threaten her threaten the Shadow Peak line." His golden eyes swept a room, daring anyone to challenge him. "She will be given quarters, provisions, and freedom to move within the fortress. She will be addressed with respect, and she will be protected as though she were blood." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Curia felt their stares like physical weight, assessing, judging, calculating. She lifted her chin and met their gazes, refusing to cower even as her heart hammered against her ribs. An older wolf stepped forward, his silver hair pulled back in warrior braids. "My king, with respect, an Omega to raise the air?" "The magic chose her, Commander Aldrich. Would you question fate itself?" Zerak's tone was silk over steel. "I question the wisdom of placing our future in hands so weak." Aldrich's lip curled slightly. "Omegas are submissive by nature. How can she protect him when the assassins return?" Before Curia could stop herself, words burst from her throat. "I'm standing right here." The hall went silent. Every eye turned to her. She felt Zerak's attention sharpen beside her, felt the dangerous shift in the room's energy, but she was done being invisible. "You want to know if I'm worthy to protect Ashen?" She pulled back the silk wrap, slightly revealing the baby's peaceful face. "I found him dying in the snow. I could have run, probably should have run, but I didn't. I gave up my freedom, my life, everything I had to save a child I didn't know. So yes, Commander, I'm weak. I'm an Omega, but I'm also the only reason your heir is breathing. Perhaps you should question your own warrior's vigilance before you question mine." The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Zerak laughed, a short, sharp sound that held genuine amusement. "She has claws, after all. Anyone else wish to test them?" No one spoke. "Good." Zerak stood, descending the dais until he stood beside her. Up close, she could feel the heat radiating from him, the barely restrained power that made every wolf in the room instinctively submit. "Curia is under my direct protection. Spread the word." The council dismissed with grudging nods and sideways glances. As the crowd dispersed, Curia felt the weight of their judgment, but also something else, a grudging respect from some, fear in others. She'd spoken to an alpha commander without permission and survived. In their world, that meant something. Zerak waited until they were alone before turning to her. "That was either very brave or very stupid. Does it matter which?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Not particularly, but don't make a habit of challenging my commanders in open council. Some of them would consider it an invitation to prove their dominance." "And you?" She met his eyes. "What do you consider it?" He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gaze. "Refreshing." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the empty hall with more questions than answers. The days that followed taught Curia that Zerak's protection was both shield and shadow. She saw him in glimpses throughout the fortress, always moving, always commanding, a force of nature wrapped in flesh. He settled disputes with brutal efficiency, trained with his warriors until they were bloody and exhausted, and ruled his territory with an iron fist that left no room for weakness or mercy. Wolves who crossed him disappeared or returned broken. Threats to the pack were eliminated swiftly and without remorse. He was ruthless, terrifying, everything she'd expected an Alpha King to be. But there were moments, brief and unguarded, when she glimpsed something else.
She saw it the first time 3 days after the council meeting. She'd taken Ashen to the fortress gardens, a wild, beautiful space where winter roses bloomed impossibly in the snow. The mark allowed her this much freedom, and she craved the open air after days of stone walls. She was humming softly to Ashen, watching his eyes track the falling snowflakes, when she sensed movement behind her. Zirak stood at the garden entrance, half hidden in shadow, watching them. He didn't approach, didn't speak, just stood there with an expression of such profound grief that Curia's breath caught. She saw it then, the weight he carried, the loss that carved lines into his face when he thought no one was looking. He wasn't watching her, he was watching Ashen, seeing a brother's child who would grow up without parents, seeing the last fragment of family he had left. When their eyes met, the grief vanished, replaced by his usual mask of control. He turned and left without a word. She saw it again when she passed his study late one night, Ashen fussy and refusing to sleep. The door was cracked open, revealing Zirak hunched over a desk covered in maps and reports. His shoulders were tight with tension, and she heard him speaking to someone she couldn't see, a beta advisor, she guessed. I don't care what the trade guild demands. If they can't guarantee safe passage for our merchants through Silver Moon territory, we find new routes. I won't lose more wolves to ambush. His voice was hard, but underneath it she heard exhaustion. How many does that make this month? 7, my king. 3 families. Zirak's fist came down on the desk. 7, and the council wants to know why I won't negotiate peace with those bastards? He laughed bitterly. They murder my brother, target my nephew, slaughter my people, and I'm supposed to smile and extend an olive branch? The council fears war. The council fears everything. Zirak straightened, rolling his shoulders. But they're not wrong. We can't afford open conflict, not with our forces divided and the air still vulnerable. He paused, and his voice dropped to something raw. I'm trying, Aldrich. I'm trying to hold this territory together, protect what's left of my family, and somehow prevent the bloodbath everyone sees coming. But I'm not sure it's enough. It has to be enough, my king. You're all we have. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Curia backed away silently, holding Ashen close. She'd seen Zirak as her captor, the alpha who'd stolen her freedom, but listening to him now, hearing the weight of responsibility in every word, she realized he was as trapped as she was, just in a different kind of cage. Days turned into a week, and Curia found herself watching him more closely. She noticed the way he moved through the fortress, always alert, always scanning for threats. The way he paused whenever he saw her with Ashen, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it away. The way he took his evening meal alone in his chambers rather than in the great hall, avoiding the performance of leadership for a few stolen hours. He watched him train in the courtyard one morning, sparring with warriors twice his size and dropping them like stones. His body was a weapon, all controlled violence and lethal precision. But when one of the younger wolves fell hard and didn't rise immediately, Zirak was there in an instant, checking for injury with hands that were surprisingly gentle. You dropped your guard on the left, he told the young wolf, helping him up. Again, that's how you die. Understand? Yes, my king. Good. Now get back up and show me you've learned. It was harsh, but not cruel. Teaching, not punishing. The realization unsettled her. That evening she found him in the library, a massive room filled with ancient texts and the smell of old leather. He was reading by firelight, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ashen had been fussy all day, and she'd come seeking a distraction, but now she hesitated in the doorway. Zirak glanced. You don't need permission to enter rooms in your own home, Curia. It's not my home, it's my prison. The words came out softer than she intended, lacking their usual venom. Something shifted in his expression. Is that how you still see it? She stepped inside, settling into a chair near the fire. Ashen squirmed in her arms, and she adjusted him automatically. What else would I call it? I can't leave. I can't make my own choices. I exist solely to keep him alive. That's not entirely true. Zirak closed his book. You have choices within the boundaries of the bond. You can go where you wish within the fortress and grounds, pursue interests, learn, grow. Many wolves have less freedom than that. Many wolves aren't magically enslaved. No, his voice was quiet. Most are enslaved by duty, by loyalty, by the expectations of their bloodline. I was born to rule, Kyria. Do you think I had a choice in that? My entire life has been sacrifice, every decision made for the good of the pack, every relationship calculated for political gain, every moment spent carrying the weight of thousands of lives. He met her eyes. We're both trapped, just in different kinds of cages. She wanted to argue, to rage at the comparison, but she couldn't, because looking at him now, at the exhaustion in his eyes and the tension in his shoulders, she saw the truth of it. He was king, but he wasn't free. He was powerful, but power came at a cost she was only beginning to understand. Ashen yawned, his tiny mouth forming a perfect circle, and Zirak's expression softened imperceptibly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing towards the baby. Kyria hesitated, then carefully transferred Ashen into his uncle's arms. Zirak held him with surprising competence, supporting his head naturally, his massive hands gentle around the fragile body. "He looks like Darius," Zirak murmured. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." His thumb brushed Ashen's cheek. "My brother was good, better than me. He would have been a better king if he'd wanted it, but he chose love instead, chose family, and they killed him for it." The raw pain in his voice cracked something in Kyria's chest. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Zirak's jaw tightened. "I failed him, failed to see the threat until it was too late, and now all I can do is make sure I don't fail his son." "That's why you need me," Kyria said quietly. "Not just the mark. You need someone who won't fail him either." Golden eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw past the Alpha King to the man beneath, scarred, grieving, desperate to protect the last piece of family he had left. Yes. In the firelight, holding his nephew while shadows danced across ancient stone, Zirak looked less like a monster and more like what he truly was, a man carrying impossible burdens, doing terrible things to protect what he loved, and terrified that it would still not be enough. And Kyria realized with uncomfortable clarity that she was beginning to see him not as her captor, but something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous, an equal in captivity, a reluctant ally, perhaps, God help her, someone she could understand.
Chapter 4. The oracle arrived on the 10th day, carried into the fortress on a litter borne by 4 silent wolves. Kyria watched from her window as the procession entered through the main gates, led by Zarek himself. Even from a distance, she could sense something otherworldly about the figure wrapped in layers of pale furs, something that made the mark on her arm pulse with uneasy warmth. "The seer of the veil," murmured Alara, the young servant who'd been assigned to help with Ashen. "I've never seen her leave her mountain temple, not in my lifetime." "Why is she here?" Kyria asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "For you, my lady, for the mark." Alara's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. "They say she can read fate itself in the patterns of ancient magic. If anyone can tell you what the Keeper's seal truly means—" She trailed off as a knock sounded at the door. Zarek entered without waiting for permission, his expression grave. "The seer wishes to examine your mark, now." It wasn't a request. Kyria lifted Ashen from his cradle, wrapping him against her chest. "He comes with me." "I wouldn't expect otherwise." Something flickered in Zarek's eyes, approval perhaps, But Kyria, the seer, doesn't speak in comfortable truths. Whatever she reveals, it cannot be unheard. Unlike this mark, which cannot be undone, she met his gaze. I stopped believing in comfortable truths the moment I touched your nephew. The chamber where they met the seer was deep in the fortress's oldest wing, a circular room carved from black stone that seemed to drink in the light from the torches. Ancient symbols covered the walls, wolf totems, moon phases, and sigils Kyria didn't recognize. The air itself felt heavy, charged with power that made her skin prickle. The child, bring him closer. Kyria's arms tightened protectively around Ashen, but Zarek's hand on her shoulder steadied her. Together they approached the throne. The seer's head tilted, and though Kyria couldn't see her eyes through the veil, she felt the weight of that ancient gaze like a physical touch. The last heir of Shadow Peak, blood of kings, touched by death, saved by... She paused, her attention shifting to Kyria. "Show me your arm, child." Kyria extended her right arm, the mark gleaming gold in the torchlight. The wolves circling the crescent moon seemed to move beneath her skin, restless and alive. The seer reached out with trembling fingers, not quite touching the mark, but hovering just above it. The air between skin and ancient hand began to shimmer. Then the old woman gasped, a sharp, startled sound that echoed in the chamber. "Impossible," she breathed. "It cannot be, not after so long." "What?" Zarek's voice was sharp. "What do you see?" Not a blood oath. The seer's hand trembled as she withdrew it. Not a simple binding. This is the keeper's seal, the original mark, unchanged and unbroken since the first age. Silence fell like a stone into deep water. Kyria felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" The seer turned her veiled face toward Zarek. "You know the story, Alpha King. Every child knows it. The tale of Mayra the Merciful and the choice that shaped our kind." "A legend," Zarek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A children's story. All stories hold truth if you know how to listen." The seer's fingers traced patterns in the air, and images began to form in the smoke rising from the torches, shadowy figures moving through scenes of ancient history. 1,000 years ago, when the first werewolf kingdom stood proud and terrible, there lived an Omega named Mayra the Merciful. She was nothing, less than nothing, a healer in the royal household, invisible to all but those who needed her gifts. Kyria watched the smoke images shift and coalesce. She saw a woman, small, dark-haired, hands stained with medicinal herbs, moving through a palace that gleamed with power and cruelty. The king of that age was called Vorath the Conqueror. He had unified the packs through strength and fear, building an empire on the backs of the weak. Omegas were chattel, possessions, breeding stock for the noble lines. They had no rights, no voice, no hope of anything better. The smoke showed a massive wolf, golden and terrible, standing over prostrate figures. But Vorath had one weakness, his infant son, the crown prince, born sickly and weak. The child should have died in his first winter, but Mayra's healing gifts kept him alive. Day after day, night after night, she poured her strength into the dying air. And one night, when the child's fever broke and death itself retreated, the mark appeared. The smoke Mayra lifted her arm, and Karaya saw it, the exact same pattern that now burned on her own skin. Wolves circling a crescent moon, rendered in light and power. "The keeper's seal," the seer said softly, "a bond forged not by magic alone, but by the Omega's sacrifice. It made her necessary, irreplaceable. For the first time in her life, Mayra had power, the power of being needed by the most powerful king in the world. "What happened to her?" Kariah's voice came out barely above a whisper. The seer's hands trembled. "That depends on which version of the story you believe. In one telling, Mayra used her position to gradually change Vorath's heart. She showed him that Omegas were not weak, but resilient, not worthless, but essential. Through her influence, the king began to reform his kingdom, granting Omegas rights and protections. When the prince came of age, he inherited a kingdom built on compassion rather than conquest. Mayra saved not just the child, but an entire civilization. The smoke images showed the kingdom transforming, walls coming down, wolves of all ranks living together, prosperity and peace spreading like dawnlight." "And the other version?" Zarek asked, his voice tight. The seer's head bowed. "In the other telling, Vorath saw Mayra only as a tool. He used the mark to control her, to ensure she could never leave or refuse his commands. He kept her chained to the prince, forcing her to give and give until she was hollow. And when she finally understood that she would never be seen as anything more than a possession," the seer paused, "she destroyed them all." The smoke images shifted violently. Kariah watched in horror as the palace burned, as wolves turned on each other in savage fury, as the entire kingdom collapsed into chaos and blood. "Mayra broke the bond," the seer said quietly, "knowing it would kill both her and the prince, knowing it would shatter the kingdom's stability and plunge the Pax into centuries of war. Some say she did it out of madness. Others say it was the only choice left to her, to burn everything down rather than accept eternal slavery." The smoke dissipated, leaving only the acrid smell and the weight of those ancient possibilities hanging in the air. Kariah found her voice, though it shook. "Which version is true?" "Both, neither. The truth was lost to time." The seer turned her veiled face back to Kariah. "The mark remembers, child. It has chosen you for the same test Mayra faced. Will you be the Omega who saves or the Omega who destroys?" "That's not fair," Kariah said, anger rising in her throat. "I never asked for this. I never wanted this power or this choice." "Neither did Mayra." The seer's voice held infinite sadness. "But the mark doesn't care about fairness. It cares only about sacrifice and what that sacrifice will become, salvation or vengeance." Zarek stepped forward, his presence commanding even in this ancient space. "You said the bond can be broken. How?" "The keeper must choose," the seer replied. "When the child reaches a moment of true crisis, when death stands close enough to touch, the bond will offer a choice. The keeper can sacrifice everything, her life, her power, her very essence, to save the child. Or she can sever the connection, reclaiming her freedom at the cost of the child's life." She paused. "Mayra chose freedom. The question is, what will you choose, Kariah of Nopak?" The words hit like a physical blow. Kariah looked down at Ashen, sleeping peacefully against her chest, innocent and trusting, then at the mark that branded her his keeper, his protector, his potential destroyer. "There's more," the seer said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The mark grows stronger as the bond deepens. Every moment you care for the child, every time you choose his needs over your own, the seal tightens. By the time you face that final choice, you will love him as though he were born of your own body. The mark ensures it, and that love will make the decision unbearable." "Why?" Kariah's cracked voice asked. "Why would the magic do that?" "Because true sacrifice cannot exist without true love," the seer replied. "Mayra didn't destroy the kingdom out of hatred. She destroyed it because she loved the prince so deeply that she couldn't bear to be his slave.
Her love became her weapon. Her salvation became her destruction. The old woman leaned forward. The mark will test you in the same way. It will make you love so deeply that the choice between freedom and sacrifice will tear you apart from the inside. Zarek's hand found Kariah's shoulder again, grounding her. Is there no other way? No path where both survive and both are free? The seer was silent for a long moment. Then, only if the one who holds power learns to relinquish it, only if the Alpha King values the Omega's freedom as much as his heir's life, only if you, Zarek of Shadow Peak, prove yourself wiser than Vorath. Her veiled head tilted toward him. Can you do that? Can you let her go when the time comes, even if it means risking everything you've sworn to protect? The question hung in the air like a blade. Kariah felt Zarek's hand tighten on her shoulder, felt the tension radiating through his body. She turned to look at him and saw the war raging behind his golden eyes. Duty versus mercy, protection versus freedom, the needs of one child against the autonomy of one woman. "I don't know," he said finally, and the honesty in those 3 words was more frightening than any lie could be. The seer nodded slowly. "Then that is the prophecy, Alpha King. The Keeper's seal has returned after 1,000 years of silence. History will repeat itself, either in salvation or destruction. The choice belongs to all of you, the Omega who bears the mark, the child who bears the burden, and the king who must decide what price he's willing to pay for legacy." She waved her hand, dismissing them. "Go. The mark has spoken. Now we wait to see what answer you will give." Kariah walked from that chamber with Ashen in her arms and prophecy burning in her mind. The mark pulsed with steady warmth, binding her to the sleeping child, and she understood with terrible clarity that every moment she spent caring for him, every smile she coaxed from his tiny face, every time her heart softened towards this innocent life, she was sealing her own fate. The mark would make her love him, and that love would become either her salvation or her destruction. There was no third option. There never had been.
Chapter 5. The new moon brought darkness so complete it felt like the world had been swallowed whole. Kyria stood at her window, Ashen restless in her arms, watching the courtyard below where torches fought against the oppressive black. The fortress felt different tonight, tense, uneasy, as though the very stone sensed something wrong. Zarek had doubled the guards and moved his own quarters closer to hers, though he hadn't explained why. He didn't need to. She'd heard the whispers among the servants, seen the way the warriors gripped their weapons tighter as sunset approached. On the new moon, the Alpha King's power waned. On the new moon, he was almost mortal. "Hush, little one," Kyria murmured, swaying gently. Ashen had been fussy all evening, refusing to settle, his tiny fists clenching and unclenching against her shoulder. The mark on her arm felt hot, almost feverish, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her racing heart. "Everything's fine. We're safe here." But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. The attack came at midnight. Kyria woke to the sound of steel on steel, distant screams, and the acrid smell of smoke. She was on her feet before full consciousness returned, clutching Ashen to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. The mark blazed hot enough to hurt, sending waves of warning through her entire body. The door to her chamber burst open. Not Zarek, 3 figures in black, faces concealed behind wolf masks, blades gleaming in the firelight. Assassins. The word crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. "The Omega and the heir. Perfect," one of them hissed. "And the heir, perfect." Curia backed toward the nursery, her mind racing. The window was too high. The connecting door led only to Xeric's chambers, and he was somewhere in the fortress fighting God knows how many attackers. She was alone, unarmed, and Omega facing trained killers. She was going to die. Ashen was going to die. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. "The Alpha King will kill you for this." "The Alpha King," the assassin laughed, moving closer, "is currently occupied with 24 of our brothers. By the time he reaches you, if he reaches you, you'll both be bleeding out on these pretty silk sheets." The other two spread out, flanking her, cutting off any escape. Professional, efficient, they'd done this before. Curia's back hit the wall. Ashen began to cry, sensing her fear, and the sound tore through her like a blade. Not him. Whatever happened to her, not him. "I'll make you a deal. Let the child live. Take me instead. I'm the one with the mark. I'm the valuable one." "Nice try, Omega." The assassin raised his blade. "But dead is better than dangerous for both of you." He lunged. The mark exploded. Curia didn't think, didn't plan, didn't even understand what was happening. One moment the blade was descending toward Ashen's small head, and the next, power erupted from her arm in a wave of molten gold. Light burst through the room, so bright she had to squeeze her eyes shut, and she felt heat, incredible searing heat, radiating from her skin. When she opened her eyes, the 3 assassins were burning. Not burning, incinerating. Their screams lasted only seconds before the golden flames consumed them completely, reducing flesh and bone to ash that scattered across her floor like gray snow. The smell was horrific, charred meat and something else, something wrong and chemical that made her gag. The flames died as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving her standing in a circle of scorch marks with Ashen wailing in her arms and her entire body shaking with shock and adrenaline. The mark on her arm pulsed with residual heat, the wolves seeming to prowl beneath her skin, satisfied. She'd killed them. The Keeper's seal had killed them to protect Ashen. The door slammed open again, and Curia spun, golden light already gathering at her fingertips before she recognized Xerac. He was splattered with blood, none of it his, she noted with distant relief, his eyes wild and his chest heaving from exertion. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance, the ash on the floor, the scorch marks on the walls, Curia standing amid the destruction with power still crackling around her like a living thing. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. She shook her head, unable to speak. Ashen's cries had faded to whimpers, and she bounced him automatically, her body moving through the motions while her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Xerac crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands, still warm from whatever violence he'd committed in the halls, cupping her face. "Look at me, Curia. Focus. Are you hurt?" "I killed them." The words came out flat, emotionless. "The mark, they were going to hurt Ashen, and I couldn't let them, and then there was fire." "I know, I felt it." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. The entire fortress felt it. That kind of power? He trailed off, something like awe flickering across his blood-stained face. The seer was right. You're not just a keeper. You're a weapon. The word cut through her shock, igniting anger. "I'm not a weapon. I'm a person who just burned 3 people alive to protect a baby." "Yes." Xerac's expression softened fractionally. "And you probably saved both your lives by doing it. If you'd hesitated, if the mark hadn't responded." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "They were after you both. Silver Moon's assassins. We found their sigils." "How many?" Her voice sounded distant, detached. 18 that we've counted so far. Most are dead, the rest fled when they felt your power surge." He glanced at the ash on her floor again. "You made quite an impression." Curia's legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline was draining, leaving exhaustion and horror in its wake. She'd taken lives, ended them with fire that came from inside her body, from a mark she never wanted. The fact that it was self-defense, that they would have killed her and Ashen without mercy, didn't make the ash on her floor any less heavy. "I think I'm going to be sick," she whispered. Xerox was already moving, guiding her to the bed, taking Ashen from her trembling arms with surprising gentleness. The baby had finally calmed, his golden eyes wide and curious as his uncle held him. Kyria bent forward, breathing deeply, fighting the nausea and the shaking and the terrible knowledge that she was capable of such destruction. "The first kill is always the hardest," Xerox said quietly, settling beside her with Ashen cradled in one arm. "Even when it's justified, even when it's necessary, your mind will replay it, question it, torture you with alternatives that didn't exist in that moment. Speaking from experience," her voice was bitter, "I've lost count of how many wolves have died by my hand." He stared at Ashen, not her. Some deserved it, some were following orders, some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't get easier, you just get better at carrying the weight. Kyria looked at him then, really looked at him, at the blood drying on his skin, the exhaustion carved into his features, the way he held his nephew with hands that just killed to protect him. This was what ruling meant for him, violence and impossible choices, and the weight of every death stacked on his shoulders like stones. "How many did you kill tonight?" "7. No hesitation, no pride, just fact. Could have been more, but I was trying to reach you. When I felt the mark surge, when I felt that much power," something vulnerable flickered across his blood-stained face. "I thought I was too late, thought I'd find you dead and ashen." His voice broke slightly. "I've never moved faster in my life." The confession settled between them, raw and honest. Kyria reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested against Ashen's back. The touch was brief, just a moment of connection, but it said what words couldn't. "I'm alive, we're both alive, we survived." "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Silver Moon won't stop just because one attempt failed." "No." Xerox's hand turned under hers, their fingers briefly tangling. "But now they know what you're capable of. Now they know the Keeper's seal isn't just a bond, it's a defense. You've shown them you're not helpless prey." "I don't feel powerful." Kyria looked at the ash scattered across her floor, at what remained of 3 living wolves. "I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself every day. First my freedom, then my future. Now I'm someone who can burn people alive without even trying." "Would you rather they had succeeded?" Her voice held an edge. "Rather you died protecting your principles while Ashen bled out beside you?" "No." The word came out fierce, surprising her with its vehemence. "No, I'd do it again. I'd burn 1,000 of them if it meant keeping him safe." She looked at Ashen, at his perfect, innocent face, and felt the truth of it in her bones. The mark had been right. She loved him, completely, impossibly, enough to kill for him without hesitation. The seer's prophecy echoed in her mind. The mark will make you love so deeply that the choice between freedom and sacrifice will tear you apart from the inside. She was already being torn apart. Every day she spent with Ashen, every moment the bond tightened, she felt herself transforming into someone new, someone who could incinerate attackers to protect what she loved, someone who would choose a child over her own freedom, someone who was starting to understand why Mara faced an impossible choice 1,000 years ago. "Stay here tonight," Xerox said, standing. "I'll have guards posted outside your door, my personal elite, wolves I trust with my life, and I'll be in the next room. If anything else happens—" "The mark will protect us," Kyria finished. "Won't it?" "Yes." He looked at the golden seal on her arm with something between respect and wariness. "But I'd rather not test its limits twice in one night." He moved toward the connecting door, then paused. "Kyria, what you did tonight, most wolves train their entire lives to access that kind of power. You did it on instinct, with no training, no preparation. The Keeper's seal chose well." "Or it chose wrong. I'm not a warrior, Xerox. I'm a person who just burned 3 people alive to protect a baby." "Aren't we all?" He smiled, tired, sad, understanding. "Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we clean up the mess and prepare for the next attack, because there will be a next attack. I know. The door closed behind him, leaving Kyria alone with Ashen and the ash of her enemies scattered across silk rugs. She lifted the baby to her shoulder, swaying gently, and felt the mark pulse with warmth, protective, possessive, binding her more tightly to this child with every passing moment. Outside, servants were already cleaning blood from the corridors, wolves were being buried or burned depending on which side they'd fought for, and somewhere in Silver Moon territory, someone was learning that their assassins had failed, that the Omega they'd dismissed as weak had incinerated 3 trained killers without breaking stride. Kyria looked at her hands, healer's hands, marked with golden fire, and wondered how many more she would kill before this prophecy played itself out. The Keeper's seal pulsed against her skin, patient and implacable. It already knew the answer. Chapter 6. Dawn came pale and hesitant, as though uncertain it was safe to illuminate what the night had wrought. Kyria hadn't slept. She'd spent the hours before sunrise alternating between pacing her chamber and staring at the ash stains that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove from the stone floor. Ashen had finally succumbed to exhaustion around 3, his small body heavy and trusting in her arms, but every time she tried to lay him down, panic clawed at her throat. What if more assassins came? What if the mark didn't respond quickly enough next time? What if she wasn't enough? The knock at her door came soft and uncertain, not the commanding rap of an alpha king, but something more tentative. She opened it to find Zerak standing there, freshly washed but still carrying the weight of the night in his eyes. He held a wooden case in his hands and wore an expression she'd never seen before, something almost apologetic. "May I come in?" The formal request surprised her. She stepped back, allowing him entry, then closed the door quietly so as not to wake Ashen. Zerak's eyes went immediately to the sleeping infant, something softening in his face before returning to her. "You're bleeding," he said. Kyria glanced down at herself, registering for the first time the cuts on her arms and hands, shallow mostly from when she'd instinctively shielded Ashen with her body during those first seconds of attack. The adrenaline had masked the pain, but now that he'd mentioned it, she felt the sting of a dozen small wounds. "It's nothing," she said. "It's something." He set the wooden case on her table and opened it, revealing bandages, salves, and various healing implements. "And someone needs to tend them. Your hands are trembling." She looked down and realized he was right. Her hands shook with fine tremors she couldn't control, aftershocks of violence and power expenditure. "I can manage." "I know you can." Zerak's voice was gentle in a way that made her throat tight. "But you don't have to. Sit." It wasn't a command, despite his usual authority. It was a request, an offering. Kyria found herself sinking into the chair by the fire, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming. Zerak pulled another chair close, settling across from her with the supplies arranged between them. "Give me your hands." She extended them slowly, watching as his much larger hands, scarred, calloused, built for violence, took hers with surprising delicacy. He examined the cuts silently, his brow furrowing at a deeper gash across her palm that she hadn't even noticed. "This one needs stitching," he murmured. "You know how to stitch wounds?" A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "I've been doing it since I was 12. Battlefield medicine was part of my training." He reached for a clean needle and thread, then paused. "This will hurt." "Everything hurts." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "What's a little more pain?" Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. He began cleaning the wound with careful precision, and Kyria focused on his face rather than the sting of the antiseptic. In the early morning light, she could see details she'd never noticed before. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the exhaustion carved so deep it had become permanent architecture. You didn't sleep either, she observed. Couldn't. He threaded the needle with steady hands. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Saw what? You, dead. Ashen, dead beside you. The needle pierced her skin, and she barely felt it beneath the weight of his confession. I kept seeing it over and over, all the ways I could have failed, all the seconds I wasted fighting my way to you when you were fighting for your lives alone. Kyria watched him work, watched the way his hands remained steady, even as his voice betrayed his fear. But we weren't alone. The mark protected us. The mark. He made another stitch, precise and efficient. The power you unleashed. He glanced up at her, something like awe mixed with concern. I've seen battle-trained alphas who couldn't summon that kind of force. You incinerated 3 wolves without even understanding what you were doing. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was saving my son. The word hung between them. Son. Not charge, not burden, not the child she was bound to. Son. As though she'd given birth to him herself, as though the bond had rewritten not just her present, but her very identity. Zerak's hand stilled on hers. You called him your son. Isn't that what the mark made him? Kyria met his eyes, defiant despite the tears threatening to spill. You were right. The seer was right. I love him, completely. It terrifies me how much I love him, how willingly I'd kill for him, how the thought of him dying makes me want to burn the world down. Her voice cracked. So yes, he's my son, whether I chose it or not. Kyria, don't. She pulled her hand away, immediately regretting the loss of his touch, but needing the distance. Don't tell me it's beautiful or destiny or some profound magic. I killed 3 people last night. I ended their lives without hesitation because they threatened someone I've known for barely 2 weeks. What does that make me? A mother. The word was quiet but absolute. It makes you a mother. The tears spilled then, hot and unstoppable. Kyria pressed her uninjured hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs, but they came anyway, great heaving gasps that shook her entire body. All the fear and rage and love she'd been holding back crashed through her defenses, and she couldn't stop it, couldn't control it, could only surrender to the overwhelming weight of everything she'd become. Zerak moved without speaking, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that destroyed her completely. She collapsed against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt, and he held her through it all. One hand cradled the back of her head, while the other traced slow circles on her spine, grounding her, keeping her from flying apart. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I brought you into this. My bloodline, my enemies, my failures, they all became yours the moment you touched him." "Stop." Kyria's voice was muffled against his chest. "Stop apologizing for circumstances neither of us controls." "But I do control them." His arms tightened around her. "I'm the Alpha King. I'm supposed to protect everyone under my rule. My pack, my family, you. And last night proved I can't. 18 assassins breached my fortress, reached your chamber, nearly killed you both. What kind of king allows that?" She pulled back enough to look at him, seeing the self-recrimination carved into every line of his face. "The kind who was outnumbered and fighting for his life in another part of the fortress. The kind who still managed to kill 7 attackers while trying to reach us. The kind who's holding together a pack that's under siege from enemies you didn't create. I should have anticipated." "You're not omniscient, Zerak." She reached up, her fingers brushing the scar through his eyebrow before she could think better of it. "You're just a man trying to protect too many people with too few resources. You're allowed to be fallible." His hand caught hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. The gesture was achingly intimate, vulnerable in a way she'd never imagined him capable of. "I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Every day, every decision, I'm terrified I'll make the wrong choice and lose what little I have left. My pack looks at me and sees strength, sees certainty, sees an alpha king who always knows the right path. But inside, his eyes closed. Inside, I'm drowning, Kyria. I'm drowning in responsibility and grief and the absolute certainty that eventually I'm going to fail someone I love. The confession shattered something in her chest. She'd seen him as her captor, as the ruthless king who'd stolen her freedom, but sitting here with his face pressed into her palm and his walls completely demolished, she saw him as he truly was. A man carrying impossible weight, terrified of dropping it, unable to ask for help because everyone depended on him to be unbreakable. "You won't fail him," she said softly. "You won't fail Ashen, because even if you stumble, even if you make mistakes, you have me now. The Mark made sure of that. We protect him together." Zarak opened his eyes, golden and raw with emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I forced this life on you. The Mark forced it on both of us. But maybe we can choose how we carry it, together instead of separately, allies instead of warden and prisoner." "Allies," he repeated as though testing the word. "Is that what we are now?" "I don't know what we are." The honesty felt dangerous but necessary. "I know I don't hate you anymore. I know I see you now, really see you, and what I see is complicated and flawed and trying so hard to do right by everyone that you're destroying yourself in the process. And that doesn't terrify you?" "Everything about this situation terrifies me," she managed a watery smile. "But last night taught me something. When I thought those assassins would kill Ashen, when I felt the Mark surge with power, I wasn't thinking about prophecies or ancient omegas or choices I might have to make someday. I was thinking, not my son, not while I'm breathing." "Kyria, let me finish." She kept her hand against his face, anchoring them both. "I'm terrified of what I'm becoming. I'm terrified of how much I love him, how deep the bond goes, how willingly I'd sacrifice everything for his safety. But I'm also starting to understand that maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's the whole point. The Mark didn't choose me because I was strong or special. It chose me because I was willing to care when no one else would." Zarak turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that felt like gratitude and apology and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "You are special, Kyria, more than you know, more than I can adequately express." The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile. Kyria was acutely aware of how close they were, how his arms still encircled her, how easy it would be to close the remaining distance and... Ashen whimpered from the cradle, breaking the spell. They separated slowly, reluctantly, the loss of contact almost painful. Zarak finished bandaging her hand while she composed herself, and they moved around each other with new awareness, a shift in their dynamic that felt seismic and terrifying and somehow right. "I should let you rest. The council will want to meet this afternoon to discuss increased security measures. I'll be there." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. "Thank you. For what? For not hating me, for being strong enough to carry what fate demanded, for..." He hesitated, then pushed forward. "For seeing me, the real me, beneath the crown and the commands. No one's done that in a very long time." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing in dawn light with bandaged hands and a heart that felt dangerously exposed. Kyria crossed to Ashen's cradle, lifting him gently, and felt the Mark pulse with warmth. But for the first time, she also felt something else, a different kind of warmth centered in her chest that had nothing to do with magical bonds and everything to do with a scarred alpha king who'd held her when she broke and confessed his deepest fears without armor. The seer's prophecy echoed, "Only if the one who holds power learns to relinquish it." Maybe Kyria thought as she held her son and remembered the feel of Zarak's arms around her. They were both learning to relinquish something. The question was whether they'd learn fast enough to survive what was coming.
Chapter 7. The journey to the Temple of First Wolves took 3 days through snow-laden mountain passes that tested even the hardiest wolves. Kyria rode in a covered sleigh with Ashen bundled against her chest, surrounded by 20 of Zarek's elite warriors who moved through the wilderness like shadows given teeth. The Alpha King himself ran ahead in wolf form, massive and black as midnight, scouting the path and eliminating threats before his convoy even knew they existed. She'd asked him why they couldn't wait, why the solstice ritual had to happen now when assassins still hunted them and the fortress remained vulnerable. His answer had been characteristically blunt, because the winter solstice is the only time the temple's magic fully awakens, because Ashen grows weaker every day despite your bond, because if we don't strengthen the mark now, he might not survive to see another winter. The words had silenced her protests. She'd noticed it herself, the way Ashen tired more easily, how his appetite had diminished, the pallor creeping beneath his golden skin. The Keeper's seal protected him, yes, but it wasn't enough, not yet. The bond needed to be completed, solidified, made permanent through ancient ritual, made unbreakable. The temple appeared on the evening of the 3rd day, rising from the mountainside like a prayer carved in stone. It was older than memory, built by the first werewolves who'd walked these lands when the world was young and wild. Massive pillars flanked an entrance wide enough to admit wolves in their shifted forms, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with dormant power that made Kyria's mark flare hot beneath her sleeve. Zarek materialized from the tree line in human form, pulling on clothes with efficient movements while his warriors maintained their protective perimeter. His eyes found Kyria immediately, assessing her condition with the careful attention that had become habitual over the past weeks. "How is he?" he asked, approaching the sleigh. "Sleeping, finally." Kyria adjusted Ashen's blankets. "The journey was hard on him." "It'll be worth it." Zarek's expression was grim. "The ritual will stabilize his wolf, anchor his life force to yours completely. He'll thrive after this." "And what will it do to me?" The question had haunted her since they'd left the fortress. Zarek's jaw tightened. "The seer said it will deepen the bond, make the connection between you unbreakable by any force except death or your own choice. So it makes me more of a prisoner." "It makes you more of a mother." His tone was gentle despite the harsh truth. "You'll feel his emotions more strongly, know when he's in danger even from a distance. The bond will become total." Kyria looked down at Ashen's sleeping face, at the child who'd already claimed so much of her heart. Total. The word should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only resignation. The bond was already total, whether the ritual confirmed it or not. "Let's get this over with," she said. The interior of the temple stole her breath. The ceiling soared impossibly high, lost in shadows that flickered with bioluminescent moss, casting everything in an ethereal blue-green light. The floor was polished stone inlaid with silver that formed intricate patterns, wolves running, moons waxing and waning, symbols she didn't recognize but that resonated in her bones. And at the center of it all stood an altar of black obsidian, its surface carved with the same design that marked her arm, the Keeper's seal, rendered in stone and waiting. "This is where it began," Zarek said quietly beside her, "where the first Keeper and the first heir were bound. Every Keeper's seal since then is an echo of that original magic, resonating through time." "Mira stood here," Kyria whispered, imagining that ancient Omega facing the same altar, the same impossible choice. "Yes, and every Keeper between then and now, though the records of them are lost." He gestured toward the altar. "The ritual requires both of us, you, me, and Ashen, the heir, the Keeper, and the Alpha, 3 points of a triangle that form unbreakable unity." Something cold settled in Kyria's stomach. You didn't mention you'd be part of this. The Alpha King is always part of it. The bond isn't just between you and Ashen, it ties all three of us together. My bloodline, your protection, his survival. Zarek's golden eyes met hers. After tonight, we'll be connected, Kyria. Not as deeply as you and Ashen, but enough that I'll feel you through it. Feel me how? Your presence, your emotions when they're strong enough, whether you're safe or in danger. He paused. Whether you're happy or suffering. The intimacy of it struck her like a blow. She'd accepted being bound to Ashen, had even cherished that connection despite its violation of her autonomy. But being bound to Zarek, too, letting him into her head, her heart, her very sense of self. I wish you told me sooner, she said, her voice tight. Would it have changed anything? Would you have refused? No, the admission tasted bitter, but I deserved to know what I was walking into.
You're right. Zarek's expression held genuine regret. I was afraid you'd see it as another chain, another way I was controlling you. And maybe it is. But it's also the only way to ensure all three of us survive what's coming. Kyria wanted to rage at him, to refuse, to walk away from this temple and its ancient magic and the bonds that kept tightening around her like a noose. But Ashen stirred against her chest, his small hand curling into her shirt, and she felt the mark pulse with warmth that was both comfort and command. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Relief flashed across Zarek's face. "Follow me." He led her to the altar, where a shallow bowl of hammered silver sat waiting. The seer emerged from the shadows. Kyria hadn't even realized she was there, her veiled face turning toward them with the weight of ancient knowledge. "The solstice reaches its peak in 1 hour," the seer said, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "When the sun stands at its weakest and the moon's absence is complete, the temple will awaken. You must be ready." "Tell us what to do," Zarek commanded. The seer gestured to the bowl. "Blood from each of you. The heirs to represent innocence and future. The keepers to represent sacrifice and protection. The alphas to represent strength and legacy. Mixed together under the dark moon, offered to the altar that has witnessed 1,000 years of bonds." Kyria's arms tightened around Ashen. "You want his blood? He's just a baby." "A single drop, child. The magic requires only intent, not suffering." The seer produced a silver needle, delicate and sharp. "The keeper must draw it. The bond recognizes only her touch in this." With trembling hands, Kyria took the needle. She cradled Ashen close, whispering apologies he couldn't understand, and pricked his tiny finger with the gentlest pressure she could manage. He whimpered, and the sound tore through her, but a single ruby drop welled up and fell into the bowl. The moment it hit silver, the temple responded. The bioluminescent moss flared brighter, the silver inlays in the floor began to glow, and Kyria felt the mark on her arm ignite with heat that was just shy of painful. "Now the keeper," the seer intoned. Kyria pricked her own finger without hesitation, letting her blood fall beside Ashen's. The 2 drops didn't mix naturally. They sat separate, distinct, until the magic caught them and swirled them together in patterns that looked like wolves chasing moons. "And the Alpha." Zarek stepped forward, taking the needle and opening a cut across his palm deep enough to stream blood into the bowl. His face remained impassive, but Kyria saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand clenched into a fist. This cost him something too, she realized. This vulnerability, this binding of his power to hers and to Ashen's. It was risk and trust wrapped together. Their blood mixed in the bowl, swirling in colors that shouldn't exist, gold and crimson and something that shimmered like starlight. The seer lifted the bowl with reverent hands and poured its contents onto the altar. The temple exploded with light.
Kyria cried out, shielding Ashen as power erupted from the altar in waves that lifted her hair and pressed against her skin like physical force. The mark on her arm blazed so hot she thought it might burn through to bone, and she felt something fundamental shift inside her, a door opening, a connection forming, threads of magic weaving between her and Ashen and Xerox until they were no longer three separate beings, but points on a triangle of power. She felt Ashen's confusion and discomfort, his instinctive reach for her comfort. She felt Xerox's fierce determination and the terror he hid beneath it. She felt the bond snap into place like a lock engaging. The light faded gradually, leaving them standing in the temple's gentle glow with the altar now bearing their mark, the keeper's seal rendered fresh and gleaming in the obsidian surface. Kyria looked down at her arm and saw the mark had changed. The wolves still circled the crescent moon, but now they were joined by new symbols, runes she didn't recognize but understood instinctively. Protection, unity, sacrifice, permanence. "It is done," the seer said softly. "The bond is complete. The keeper, the heir, and the alpha, bound until death or choice severs what fate has woven." Kyria felt it, the absolute certainty of the connection, the way she could sense Xerox's presence even without looking at him, the way Ashen's heartbeat synced with her own. They were bound, truly, completely, inextricably bound. "How do you feel?" Xerox asked roughly. "Like I'm not alone in my own head anymore," she answered honestly. "I can feel you, both of you. It's overwhelming." "It will settle." He moved closer, and she felt his approach through the bond before she saw him. The first hours are always the most intense. "You've done this before?" The question came sharper than intended. "No, but the seer explained." He stopped, his expression shifting to something like awe. "You're angry. I can feel it. Not just see it in your face, but feel the emotion itself." "Yes." Kyria's eyes blazed. "I'm furious because you're in my head now, Xerox. You're connected to me in ways I never consented to, and I can't escape it any more than I can escape this mark or this child or this entire impossible situation." His hand found hers, and the touch sent sparks through the bond that made them both gasp. "I know, and I'm sorry, but Kyria," his fingers tightened, "I'm also grateful because for the first time in my life, I'm not carrying everything alone. I can feel your strength, your determination, your love for him. It's humbling, and it makes me believe we might actually survive what's coming." The honesty in his words, amplified through the bond until she couldn't doubt their sincerity, cracked something in her defensive walls. She wanted to hold on to her anger, her sense of violation, but through the connection she felt his exhaustion, his fear, his desperate hope that this would be enough to keep Ashen safe. She felt his growing feelings for her, too, complicated and deep and terrifying in their intensity. "We should go," she said, stepping back and severing the physical contact even though the bond remained. They left the temple in silence, Kyria holding Ashen close while trying to adjust to the constant presence of two other heartbeats humming in harmony with her own. The temple of first wolves stood silent behind them, its ancient magic satisfied. The bond was complete, and Kyria understood with terrible clarity that she'd just sealed her own fate, bound not just to the child she'd saved, but to the Alpha King who commanded her captivity, connected to both of them so deeply that their emotions bled into hers and hers into theirs. The seer's prophecy echoed through the bond, shared between all of them now. Will you be the Omega who saves, or the Omega who destroys? The temple had made its choice. Now they all had to live with it.
Chapter 8. The bond settled into Kyria's consciousness like a second heartbeat, persistent, inescapable, alive with the pulse of two other souls entwined with hers. She'd expected to feel trapped, suffocated by the constant presence of Zarek's determination and Ashen's innocent needs. Instead, as they prepared to leave the temple, she felt something else entirely. Power. It started as a warmth in her marked arm, different from the heat of the bond's completion. This was older, wilder, like electricity crackling beneath her skin. The bioluminescent moss that had dimmed after the ritual suddenly flared brighter, responding to something in her presence. Kyria froze, ashen secure against her chest, watching as the light spread across the temple walls in patterns that hadn't been visible before. Zarek, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Something's happening. The Alpha King turned sharply, his hand instinctively moving to the blade at his hip, but he stopped when he saw what Kyria saw, the walls themselves transforming, stone becoming translucent, as if the temple were shedding an ancient disguise. Behind the familiar surface, murals emerged from shadow and time, painted in pigments that glowed with their own inner light. The seer's breath caught, a sound like prayer and fear combined. Impossible. These haven't been visible for 1,000 years. Kyria moved closer to the nearest wall, drawn by a compulsion she didn't understand but couldn't resist. The murals showed wolves, dozens of them, hundreds, but not in the noble poses she'd seen carved into the altar. These wolves wore chains, golden chains that gleamed with the same magic as her mark, binding them to their knees before a massive throne where a single alpha sat crowned in darkness. "What is this?" she whispered. The seer's veiled face turned toward the murals, and for the first time since Kyria had met her, the old woman's voice trembled. "The true history, the story we forgot or were made to forget." Zarek approached another section of wall where the images continued their tale. His expression had gone carefully blank, but through the bond, Kyria felt his turmoil, confusion warring with denial, curiosity battling something that felt uncomfortably like dread. "These show the first age, when the Alpha King unified the packs." Unified. Kyria's eyes traced the progression of images. She saw omegas dragged before the throne, saw the chains of magic wrapping around their arms in patterns identical to her keeper's seal, saw their faces twisted in anguish as they were bound to heirs they hadn't chosen, forced into service by mystical compulsion that stripped away their will. This isn't unification. This is enslavement. "The histories say," Zarek began. "The histories lie." The words came from Kyria's mouth with a certainty that wasn't entirely her own. She moved along the wall, following the story as it unfolded in pigment and magic. The bound Omega serving, suffering, dying in service to heirs who consumed their life force like parasites. And over it all, the Alpha King presiding with absolute power, using the bonds to control not just the Omegas, but every pack that depended on their keepers to protect their young. Then the mural shifted. One Omega stood alone before the throne, her arm blazing with the same mark Kyria bore. But in her free hand, she held something. A weapon? No. Kyria leaned closer, her marked arm burning hotter as she studied the image. Not a weapon, a choice. The Omega's keeper seal was breaking apart, wolves scattering from the crescent moon, chains shattering into light. And the Alpha King on his throne was falling, his crown cracking, his power dissolving as the mystical bonds he'd forged to enslave an entire designation came undone. Mara! The name fell from Kyria's lips like revelation. She didn't serve the first Alpha. She destroyed him. The seer's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. Yes, the Breaker, they called her, the Omega who shattered the chains that bound her people and toppled a tyrant from his throne. But that story was too dangerous to remember, too powerful to be allowed into the histories. So they rewrote it, made her a loyal servant instead of a revolutionary rebel, made the keeper seal into a symbol of duty rather than the tool of oppression it was designed to be. Kyria's legs gave out. She sank to the temple floor, clutching Ashen close, while her mind reeled with the implications. Everything she'd been told about the Keeper Seal, about the sacred duty and the noble tradition, all of it built on lies. The mark on her arm wasn't ancient protection, it was an ancient prison. Through the bond, Kyria felt Zarek's shock mirroring her own. He stood before the murals like a man watching his entire worldview crumble, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. If this is true, if the first Alpha was a tyrant, then everything the Alpha Kings have been built on is founded on the subjugation of Omegas, Kyria finished. Her voice shook with fury that had been building since the moment Zarek's guards had dragged her from her village, since she'd woken with this mark burning on her arm without her consent, since every choice had been stripped away in the name of duty and destiny and lies. I didn't know. The words burst from Zarek, raw with anguish that bled through the bond until Kyria could barely separate his horror from her own. I swear to you, Kyria, I didn't know. The histories, the seer, even my father, everyone said the Keeper Seal was sacred, that it had always been this way. Ignorance doesn't absolve you. But even as she said it, Kyria felt the truth of his emotions through their connection. He genuinely hadn't known. None of them had. The lie was so complete, so carefully maintained across centuries that even the Alpha Kings themselves had forgotten they were perpetuating a system built on oppression. The seer moved closer to the murals, her ancient fingers tracing the image of Mara breaking her chains. The temple remembers what we forgot. It responded to you, child, because you carry both the mark and the potential. You are keeper and captive, servant and slave. The magic recognizes the duality, the tension between duty forced and duty chosen. It's showing you what Mara saw, what she knew, that the bonds were never meant to be chains. Then what were they meant to be? Kyria demanded. The final mural provided the answer. It showed Mara after the tyrant's fall, standing before a new gathering of wolves. Her arms still bore a mark, but different now, simplified, transformed. And around her stood other Omegas, unmarked but free, their hands extended in gestures of choice rather than compulsion. The image suggested what the Keeper's bond could have been, a protection offered freely, a connection forged in consent, a relationship of mutual care, rather than magical slavery.
What it should have been before power corrupted it into chains. Ashen stirred against Kyria's chest, his small hand finding her marked arm. Through the bond, she felt his confusion at her distress, his instinctive reach for comfort that had nothing to do with magical compulsion and everything to do with the genuine attachment they'd formed. He loved her because she'd chosen to care for him, had protected him and held him and soothed his fears. The bond might have brought them together, but what they'd built was real. The realization didn't ease her fury, but it complicated it. "What do we do with this?" Zarek's voice pulled her back. He stood before the murals with his shoulders bowed under the weight of revealed truth, and through the bond, Kyria felt his genuine desire to make this right, warring with the impossibility of undoing what had already been done. "I can't change the past. I can't undo the mark or break the bonds without killing Ashen. But I won't continue perpetuating this system now that I know what it truly is." Kyria rose to her feet, Ashen secure in her arms, and met the Alpha King's golden eyes. "Mara found a way to break the chains while keeping the child safe. These murals show it. The temple revealed this truth for a reason." "You want to become the breaker," he said quietly. "I want the choice that was stolen from me, from every Omega who's been bound against their will for 1,000 years. Her marked arm blazed with heat that was pain and power combined. The ritual completed the bond between us, yes, but it also awakened something else. The temple recognized me, Xerox. It showed me the truth because I meant to do something with it. The seer's veiled face turned toward her with something that might have been hope or warning or both. The path of the breaker is dangerous, child. Mayra paid a terrible price for the freedom she won, and the world she fought for was lost to time and lies. Then maybe it's time to fight for it again. Kyria looked down at Ashen, at the innocent child who'd been born into a system he didn't choose any more than she did, starting with making sure he grows up in a world where bonds are chosen, not forced, where protection is offered, not commanded. Through the connection that tied them together, Kyria felt Xerox's decision crystallize. It tasted of fear and determination and something that might have been redemption. Then we do it together, whatever it takes to break these chains while keeping our son safe. We find a way. Our son. The words sent a jolt through the bond, acknowledged something none of them had spoken aloud, that Ashen belonged to all three of them now, bound together by magic that was both prison and protection, curse and connection. The temple's light dimmed gradually, the murals fading back into stone as if satisfied their message had been delivered. But Kyria knew she'd never forget what she'd seen, would never stop seeing the wolves in chains and the Omega who'd freed them. The Breaker's story had been buried for 1,000 years. It was time to excavate the truth. They left the Temple of First Wolves carrying more than the completed bond. They carried revelation, rage, and the first stirrings of revolution, the understanding that the foundation of their entire world was built on oppression that had been disguised as duty, and somewhere in the patterns of the mark on Kyria's arm, in the magic that bound her to Ashen and Xerox, lay the key to breaking chains that had held for a millennium. The breaker had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same.
Chapter 9. They made it halfway down the mountain before Kyria felt it, a wrongness in the bond that had nothing to do with the revelations in the temple. It came from Xerox, a knot of guilt so dense and suffocating that it leaked through their connection like poison seeping into clean water. He'd been silent since they left, running ahead in wolf form to scout their path, but his emotions betrayed him with every stride. He was hiding something. "Stop!" Kyria's voice cut through the wind-whipped darkness. The sleigh jerked to a halt, and the warriors surrounding them shifted uneasily, hands moving to weapons as they scanned for threats. But the only threat was the one Kyria felt pulsing through the bond, the secret festering in Xerox's consciousness that he couldn't quite suppress. The massive black wolf materialized from the shadows, and moments later Xerox stood before her in human form, his expression carefully neutral. But through their connection, Kyria felt everything, the dread, the shame, the desperate hope that she wouldn't push, wouldn't ask, wouldn't force him to confess what he'd been concealing. "We need to keep moving," he said. "These mountains aren't safe after dark." "Neither are lies." Kyria climbed from the sleigh, clutching Ashen close. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the confrontation building around him. "You're terrified of something. I can feel it. And it's not assassins or the cold or anything out here in the darkness. It's me. You're afraid of me." Xerox's jaw clenched. "Kyria, what did you do?" The question emerged cold and precise. "What aren't you telling me about the ritual?" She watched him struggle, felt the war raging inside him through their bond, the urge to protect her from the truth battling the knowledge that she deserved honesty, that lies would only poison what fragile trust they'd begun to build. The guilt intensified until it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "Tell me," she demanded, "now." The words came out broken, defeated. "The council, They had plans for the completed ritual that I didn't share with you." Ice flooded Kyria's veins. What kind of plans? The bond was meant to be unbreakable, not just strong, literally unbreakable by any means except death. Xerox's hands clenched into fists. They believed that once the ritual was complete, the magic would... ensure your loyalty, remove the possibility of rebellion or escape, make you permanently, irrevocably bound not just to Ashen, but to the throne itself. The confession hung in the frozen air between them, each word a betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. Curia's marked arm began to burn, heat building beneath her skin that had nothing to do with the bond's usual warmth. This was different, hotter, sharper, edged with fury that made the air around her shimmer. "You knew," her voice came out deadly calm. "You knew they planned to use ancient magic to enslave me further, to strip away even the illusion of choice, and you brought me to that temple anyway." "I didn't agree with them." His anguish bled through the bond, genuine and raw. "I argued against it, told them the bond had to be built on trust, not compulsion. But they overruled me, said the risk of losing you was too great, that the kingdom couldn't survive if you broke the bond or fled or... So you lied to me instead." Curia's laugh was bitter as ash. "Let me walk into that temple thinking I understood what was happening, that I was making a choice, when really you were all just tightening the chains." Through the bond, she felt his desperate attempt to explain, to make her understand the impossible position he'd been in, caught between his council's demands and his growing feelings for her, between duty to his kingdom and the desire to give her the freedom she deserved. But the explanations dissolved in the face of her rage, in the magnitude of his deception. Did it work? Am I trapped now? Permanently enslaved by magic I can't break? Xeroc's silence was answer enough. The mark on Curia's arm flared with light so bright it cast stark shadows across the snow. She looked down and gasped. The wolves circling the crescent moon were moving, dissolving from gold into something else entirely. Silver, pure, brilliant silver that spread through the design like mercury, transforming the mark from warm gold to cold, blazing chrome. "What's happening?" Fear crept into Xeroc's voice. The seer emerged from the sleigh, her veiled face turning toward Curia with what might have been awe or terror. "The breaker's mark. The temple awakened more than truth in you, child. It awakened potential." Power surged through Kyria's arm, racing up to her shoulder and spreading through her chest until her entire body felt like a conduit for ancient magic. She could sense the bonds connecting her to Ashen and Xerac, could feel them like threads of light she could trace with her consciousness. And more than that, she could feel how to sever them. The knowledge came with terrible clarity. One pull, one act of will, and she could shatter the bonds entirely, break them so completely that no magic could ever reform them, no ritual could ever rebuild what she destroyed. She would be free. Truly, permanently free, and the power structure that had enslaved Omegas for 1,000 years would begin to crumble with her liberation. But Ashen would die. The thought crashed over her like ice water. The baby stirred against her chest, his small hand curling into her shirt, and through the rapidly transforming bond, she felt his life force intertwined with hers. The ritual had anchored him to her completely. Breaking the bond wouldn't just free her, it would tear out the foundation of his existence, unravel the magic keeping his wolf stable, kill him as surely as a blade through his heart. "Don't!" Xerac's voice cracked. "Please, Kyria, whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking that I could end this." The silver light pulsed brighter. "Right here, right now. Break the bonds, walk away free, let your entire corrupt system collapse under the weight of its own oppression. And murder my son in the process. Your son who was used as a tool to enslave me." But even as she said it, Kyria looked down at Ashen's sleeping face, felt his innocent trust, remembered every moment she'd soothed his cries and celebrated his smiles, and freely chosen to love him despite the bonds that forced them together. This isn't his fault. None of this is his fault. Through the bond, she felt Xerac's terror, his certainty that he was about to lose everything, his son, his keeper, perhaps even his life if the ancient magic backlashed when she broke it. But beneath the fear lay something else, resignation, acceptance, the understanding that he deserved this, that his deception had earned him whatever judgment she chose to render. "I won't stop you," he said quietly. "If you choose to break the bond, I won't fight it. I'll accept the consequences of what I've done, what my council tried to do, what this entire system has been doing to Omegas for generations. But Kyria," his voice broke, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Not because I'm afraid of what you'll do, but because you deserved better. You deserved the truth, the choice, the freedom I couldn't give you." The sincerity of it struck him like a physical blow, amplified through their connection until she couldn't doubt his remorse. And that made it worse somehow, that his regret was genuine, that he understood the magnitude of his betrayal, that he would let her destroy everything rather than try to manipulate or control her further. The seer's voice cut through the charged silence. "There is another way." Kyria's silver mark pulsed. "What way?" "The bond you feel now, the one they tried to make unbreakable, it isn't complete yet. The council's magic attempted to set it, to make it permanent, but the temple's revelation interrupted the process. You stand at a threshold, child. You can shatter what exists, or you can remake it entirely." "Remake it how?" "Forge a new bond, not built on compulsion or control, but on equality and choice." The seer moved closer, her ancient presence radiating power that resonated with the silver light emanating from Kyria's arm. The breaker didn't just destroy the tyrant's chains, she created something new to replace them. Bonds that could only exist if both parties chose them freely, that dissolved the moment consent was withdrawn, that gave power to the Omega instead of stripping it away. Kyria's breath caught. "That's possible?" "With the breaker's mark active, yes, but it requires trust, the very thing that's been shattered between you. Both of you must agree. Both must choose to surrender control and accept vulnerability. Both must risk everything on the possibility that love and equality can be stronger than chains ever were." The word love hung in the air like a challenge. Kyria looked at Zerak through the bond that still connected them, feeling his emotions laid bare. The guilt and fear, yes, but also the fierce protectiveness, the growing attachment, the feelings he'd been afraid to name even to himself. He cared for her, not just as his son's keeper, but as herself, the strong, stubborn Omega who'd challenged him at every turn, who'd loved his son with a ferocity that matched his own, who'd somehow become essential to him in ways that had nothing to do with magic or duty. But caring wasn't enough to erase betrayal. "How do I know you'll choose differently?" asked Kyria. "How do I know that the moment I forge this new bond, you won't just find new ways to control me, new chains to replace the old ones?" "You don't," Zerak's honesty cut through the bond. "I can promise you that I'll try, that I want to be worthy of your trust, that I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I choose you freely rather than through compulsion. But promises are just words. The only real answer is risk. You risk trusting me, and I risk that you'll choose to break the bond anyway if I fail you." Kyria looked at Ashen, at the child who represented both her captivity and her purpose, the weight of chains and the possibility of something better. Then she looked at the silver mark blazing on her arm, the breaker's power that gave her the choice that had been stolen from every Omega before her. She could shatter everything and walk away free. Or she could risk everything on the possibility that broken trust could be rebuilt, that love could grow from the ashes of betrayal, that she and Zerak together could forge something new, not chains, but freely chosen connection, not slavery, but partnership. The silver light intensified until it illuminated the entire mountainside, and Kyria felt the magic waiting for her decision, poised between destruction and creation, ending and beginning. "If we do this," she said slowly, "the bond changes completely. I'm not your captive or your subject, I'm your equal. And the moment you treat me otherwise, the moment you try to control me or use the bond to strip my autonomy, it dissolves permanently." Through the connection, she felt Zerak's fierce agreement, his willingness to accept terms that would make him vulnerable in ways no Alpha King had been in a millennium. "Yes, equal, partners, I swear it."
And we find a way to end the system that did this, not just to me, but to every Omega who's been bound without choice. We dismantle it piece by piece until the Keeper's seal is what it was meant to be, protection offered freely, not chains forced by magic. We'll do it together. Kyria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice settling over her shoulders. Then she reached out with her free hand and took Zerax, their fingers intertwining as the silver light of the breaker's mark flowed between them. Through the connection, she felt his hope and terror, his love and his fear, the absolute vulnerability of a man surrendering control to the Omega he'd wronged. And she chose trust over destruction. The silver light exploded outward, rewriting the bond in patterns that sang with equality and consent, with power shared rather than hoarded, with protection that flowed both ways. Kyria felt the old chains dissolve and new connections form, still binding them together, still anchoring Ashen's life to hers, but transformed into something that recognized her agency, her choice, her absolute right to walk away if the partnership failed. When the light faded, the mark on her arm had changed again. Still silver, but the wolves and moon now formed a different pattern, a circle rather than chains, continuous and unbroken, but with no beginning and no end, no master and no servant, just equals choosing each other freely. "It's done," the seer whispered, "the first new bond forged in 1,000 years." Kyria looked at Verak and felt him through their transformed connection, not overwhelming, not invasive, but present, chosen, real. "Don't make me regret this," she said. His hand tightened on hers. "I'll spend my life earning this choice." The revolution had begun, not with destruction, but with the radical act of rebuilding power on foundations of trust instead of chains. And as they continued down the mountain together, Kyria carried the weight of what she'd done with equal parts hope and fear, knowing that she'd just risked everything on the possibility that love freely chosen could be stronger than any magic ever forced. The breaker did not shatter the bonds, she had transformed them. And in so doing, she'd created something infinitely more dangerous to the old order than destruction could ever be, proof that another way was possible.